Good morning. So I hope everybody's well. Not legal advice. Like, subscribe, share, review, comment, whatever. All good. Today's joke: I tried to take a quality photo of a wheat field, but it turned out too grainy. Anyway, hope everybody's well. I promised to do a video about the aLPINE situation and to kind of put it in context and maybe clarify some issues. As I went through it, I don't know if I'm clarifying anything, but maybe, hopefully, somebody might understand more after I am complete. So, so Gtii is another stock. It's heavily shorted. Many believe that a company called aLPINE, if it's forced to close its doors, that will facilitate a short squeeze. aLPINE's been engaged in litigation with Finra, seeking to block ongoing disciplinary proceedings because some people would think they're scumbags, but that's just opinion. This relates to continuing violations of Finra rules and financial harm that's been caused to the public, apparently. So, in or about June of 2023, and it's kind of how we get to this video here today. And I'm looking at a phone because my printer, for some reason, doesn't want to print. aLPINE sought an injunction in federal court seeking to block Finra's ability to complete disciplinary proceedings. And they were trying to block that because disciplinary proceedings that were ongoing may have resulted in the permanent expulsion, exclusion, and otherwise of aLPINE. So they went into federal court trying to block that from happening. And now to put it in a little context, aLPINE itself, April of 2022, was disciplined for various egregious misconduct, for stealing client money, misappropriating money, etc. The hearing officer at Finra, this is again April of 2022, concluded the only way to protect the public was to permanent expulsion of aLPINE. The hearing officer also issued a permanent cease and desist order to prevent public harm. And so let me explain about the hearing officer. So Finra has a system set up of discipline. aLPINE is a member of their system. So a complaint was filed against aLPINE. A hearing officer then hears that particular complaint and then would issue a decision. So April 2022, and I think there have been prior history, there's a proceeding. The hearing officer issues an expulsion order. An expulsion order itself can then be appealed to the National Adjudicatory Council, or the NAC. That's a 15-member, basically, appellate panel that Finra has. They're in the financial industry. And so a decision of a hearing officer can be appealed to the National Adjudicatory Council, or NAC. Once you appeal something to the NAC, the matter is stayed, so the sanction itself is stayed other than a permanent cease and desist order. So since in the 422 proceeding, there had been a cease and desist order, just appealing it to the NAC doesn't seek to stop it. And I don't know specifically where they are in the appeal process, but I know that order of 422 is still on appeal. And I'll go through the order of appeal just so it gives you some context. So if a ruling goes to the NAC, they can issue an order as to the appeal, and they're supposed to do it in approximately 120 days. So if they issue an order, that order itself can be then appealed to the SEC. If the SEC issues an order or doesn't, that can be appealed to the district court. So there's a whole level of appeals. But more importantly, as to whether action can be taken against aLPINE are the stays. that stop the order from being enforced. And as I indicated, once it goes up to the NAC, there's no automatic stay for cease and desist orders. So to get a stay, you'd have to go before the SEC. You'd have to show why you weren't dangerous to the public for stealing their money, and they would have to issue a stay. So I would doubt that would happen. But let me move on. So after the April 2022 cease and desist order, in or about October of 2022, aLPINE filed a lawsuit against Finra challenging its constitutional ability to regulate aLPINE. And they kind of waited, and that lawsuit's pending. In or about April of 2023, Finra started to see that despite the existence of a cease and desist order, that aLPINE had apparently violated that approximately 35,000 times after the April 22nd, 2022 cease and desist order was issued, and then began a new proceeding. So they started a new proceeding. The new proceeding basically was to shut down aLPINE, to enforce the continuing violations of the cease and desist order. And there's a special rules and set up to deal with an expedited violations of the cease and desist order. I do not know why, by the way, it took a year for Finra to move on that, but that's what it took. So Finra then started with a new disciplinary proceeding and on an expedited basis to enforce the violations of the cease and desist order, and in essence to shut down aLPINE. aLPINE, knowing that, they acted on their existing complaint against Finra, which was filed October 2022, and in or about approximately June of 2023, they sought an injunction in federal court trying to block Finra from conducting this new disciplinary proceeding, which they knew might put them out of business permanently. The district court, the federal court, decided no, there should not be an injunction blocking the disciplinary action. That was then taken up to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal issued an administrative stay to let the parties brief the topic. That has been done. And the Court of Appeal will then issue an order on the injunction. I expect them to deny the injunction. When that will happen, it would be a pure guess, but I would not be surprised if it was before the 4th of July, because the request for an injunction pending appeal seems kind of way beyond the bounds, especially in that there's plenty of evidence that aLPINE is a bad actor. So I expect that to be issued, denial. And once that denial of the injunction happens, then Finra can go back to conducting their expulsion proceedings as to the violation of the cease and desist order. And the cease and desist order, again, is just basically stealing money, or the accusation is that aLPINE's doing all kinds of actions, basically stealing money from customers. So let's assume, for the sake of this argument, just to kind of give you a timeline, that the Court of Appeal denies the injunction on June 30th. Then Finra would have to set a new date for the continued hearing, which already started, I believe, on June 5th, for the completion of the continued hearing on the discipline and expulsion of aLPINE. It's estimated that would take about 2 to 3 days to complete that. So let's say if it started 2 weeks after June 30th, that would be mid-July. Could be later, but let's just, for the sake of this discussion, 3 days of hearing, that's the 17th. The hearing officer then would have 21 days to issue its ruling, could do it in less time. Then the matter could be presented to the National Adjudicatory Council. If the aLPINE didn't like the ruling. However, there would not be a stay of the enforcement of the cease and desist order. So, in essence, aLPINE could be put out of business at that point in time. They would seek a stay before the SEC, but I don't see the SEC granting it. So, for all time, if an appeal is taken first, let me back up. So, the hearing officer has to issue a decision within 21 days. If that decision is against one party, they have 25 days to appeal. That would then go to the National Adjudicatory Council. They would have 21 days to deny the appeal. If they accept the appeal, and they may accept this one, in essence, they'd have 120 days to rule on it. But during that time, aLPINE would have to go before the SEC and justify why the cease and desist order should not be enforced and why they should be continuing in business. So all that would occur probably within 60 days of the decision of the hearing officer. So that's kind of the timeline. Doesn't mean that there can't be additional appeals, because there can be. But once there is no stay, then Finra is just going to go ahead and, this is my opinion, Finra will just go ahead and knock aLPINE out of the box. So again, the key issues would be the appellate court denying the injunction, Finra then setting the hearing date for the discipline based upon the violations of the April 2022 cease and desist order, then the hearing on the remaining days of that disciplinary proceeding, which started June 5th, which should take 2 or 3 days, 21 days for the hearing officer to remove, 25 days for the party that wants to appeal, then 21 days for the NAC to decide if they want to accept it or not, 120 days to review, but during that first 21 days, aLPINE would seek a stay before the SEC, and if it was not granted, I would expect Finra to act during that time period. And also by that point, everybody would know that aLPINE was dead. And additionally, there's a chance at some point that, depending upon the ruling, that if aLPINE is permitted to continue to operate, that there could be a receiver or some third party put in to operate the company. If they do that, then they expose their books and records. That's also the case with regard to a bankruptcy. Could aLPINE at some point in time file a bankruptcy? It's possible. However, they might give up control over the entity over to the trustee that might expose their books and records to the public. So they may not want to file a bankruptcy. I'm sure that they considered it, because they would consider that if they filed a bankruptcy, it might provide them an additional delay. But there's, again, a risk of opening your books and records to a trustee who's not your friend, not designed to be. And also, there may be allegations of bankruptcy fraud if they do that, depending on what they do. So I hope that clarifies a little bit the sequence of events. So we're near the denial of the injunction, and then the disciplinary hearing, maybe 60 days. But without a stay from the SEC, I think aLPINE will be out of business. So I'm thinking, like, in my mind, 90 days or less. Could be longer, but that's kind of my guesstimate. And anyway, hope that helps. And, if you have questions, comments, feel free. I know that was pretty complicated. If it makes no sense, please let me know.